morning tonight. My name is Harmony Lloyd. I am the Vice President of Planning and Innovation at SMART. And we are here tonight to talk about SMART's program, Smarter Mobility. We have with us my co-lead on this project, Danny Whitehouse. He's the Vice President of Paratransit and On-Demand Services, and several other staff here to support us and to talk with all of you. So we are going to let our consultants, Michael Baker International, who we've been working with for this project, come up and tell us about what's happening and what's going on and what we can look forward to in the future.
Just to walk through really quickly, our purpose for today's meeting, according to the agenda, is to just give a general program overview, just making sure that everybody has an understanding of what the Smart Mobility Program is. Talk to you a bit about how we got to these two scenarios, what was the data and the public input that we used to get here. Run through those scenarios really quickly. They are here on the board. We can be here after the presentation to address any questions, to answer them, and then obviously kind of an open Q&A format. Just a really quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with the Smart Mobility Program. SMART consulted with Michael Baker Engineers. We are part of the larger team in an effort to evaluate the FLEX program that was launched in 2021. And that program looked at 5 FLEX zones and making that kind of a new opportunity for mobility. Following the past millage for Oakland County, SMART came back and said, in addition to kind of evaluating those 5 FLEX zones for their functionality and making sure that they should go from a pilot to kind of permanent mobility option. We also looked at kind of expanding their service area. So looking at ways to connect fixed route or connector service. How do we look at that current micro transit pilot zone and make it more permanent, and where should it be? Does it need to expand? Looking at service designs, possible alternatives to address some of the existing service challenges, and then the reason you're all here today, kind of engaging the community and understanding from municipal and community stakeholders what's important. Just to walk you through this timeline, we've been working on this study for a little bit more than a year. Our first series of activities was just to understand the landscape, to do some existing conditions, to do an origin and destination study where we talked to lots of riders on the bus, folks who were new to the service area. We went to shopping centers and regional centers, places where people already were, and maybe they weren't riding the bus, but they could to get there, and having those conversations about what was important to them. Following that series of data collection and the surveys, we also did another series of public engagement and public information to get to the point where we are now, which are these developed service alternatives. At the conclusion of public engagement, we will close it out at the end of this month, and we'll look at starting to develop a hybrid solution that evaluates scenario 1 and scenario 2, blends them together, and the release of that evaluated scenario will come out in early September 2025. So really quickly, how do we get here? So we looked at data. We really tried to understand where people are going across all modes of transportation, whether they were using a bike, a scooter, a car, but just really understanding kind of travel patterns so that we could have a good understanding of where the travel demand is. As you'll notice here with the orange, most of the trips are really short, like within 5 miles of their origin is their destination. So just really understanding that the transit demand is for short areas, short distances. Then we looked at where the jobs are. So these are these kind of really dark red circles or the highest concentration, and understanding how we can connect people and prioritizing connecting people from their homes to their places of employment, to allow employers to have employees and also to allow folks to get to work. And so what we understood is the most of the concentration is on or along a lot of major arteries. And last but not least, where are people most likely to take transit? And so we call that transit propensity. We look at several factors that help us understand kind of what makes people more likely to take transit if it's available and takes them where they want to go. And so the criteria for that is kind of along the side on the legend here. A few things to talk about. It says households that have either 0 or only 1 car, households where there may be someone with disability, households where there are a high female population. So these are kind of the criteria that we look at to understand folks who are most likely to take transit based on their demographic profile. And then we kind of compare that to the areas in the census tracts throughout the 3 counties. So having an understanding of where people are going, regardless of the mode of transit, where are jobs, where do people need to go, and then where are the communities that are most likely going to use transit, making sure that they're served, that they're identified, and that we're thoughtful when we're planning transit moving forward. And then we talk to people, like a bunch of people. And so we did rider surveys that I mentioned earlier. We did do pop-ups. We made sure to do surveys on the on-demand flex vehicles. We did stakeholder meetings. We met with elected and public officials. We had a steering committee and a technical working group, just making sure that all the voices that could be part of the conversation were included. That includes the community partners and municipalities. And this is what you all told us. You told us the number one most important thing is reliability. So later canceled trips directly have an impact on your choice to use transit as a mode to get to work or to move around. Number 2 was amenities. So how comfortable is your ride? Are there shelters? Are there benches? Is the information available to you at the shelter in real time so that you can understand on your trip? Third being frequency. So making sure that transit happens every 15 to 30 minutes. Customer service, so making sure that those interactions between the rider and the driver are improved, but also that access to information, which I mentioned earlier as part of amenities, is in real time. And then last but not least, providing coverage where it doesn't exist today. So expanding the footprint for transit. And last but not least, we talked about places that you want to go. So before I showed you common trips, and I talked about where are jobs, and I talked about where are those who are most vulnerable in transit. And then last here is when we asked if you had your druthers where you'd like to go, this is where you told us. And so really understanding some connections that people would love to make that they can't make today, making sure that was factored into the transit planning for both scenario 1 and scenario 2. So Erin Franklin's going to walk through each of the scenarios and start with doing an overview of the goals.
All right, so we're going to walk through the scenarios. Before we get started, I just want to make sure everybody's clear that we have 2 scenarios that have been developed, but we really don't want you to choose one or the other. What we really want you to do is tell us what you like about each of the 2 scenarios. Tell us what you don't like about them as well. Right? And we will use that input to help us develop a recommendation to SMART at the end of the public engagement period, which will represent the best of both scenarios. The other thing to point out is that we did develop the scenarios so that they're cost constrained. We developed both scenario 1 and scenario 2 around SMART's available budget so that we know that we could implement all of each of one of those scenarios. Ideally, at the end, we will again go back and make changes so that we can have one recommendation that reflects the best of both of those 2 scenarios. As we look through developing the scenarios, we had 3 goals in mind. So the first one was improve on-time performance. We heard that a lot, as Janae talked about during the public engagement period earlier in the year, during the origin and destination surveys, that people were really concerned about on-time performance and also making sure that the system is both efficient and effective. The second one is about improving customer experience. And third one's about improving connections and quality of life. As we walk through the 2 scenarios, we'll talk about how the scenarios impact all 3 of those goals. All right, so this is scenario 1. This one is focused on improving frequency. So again, we heard that was a top rider request. I'm going to orient you to the map. We use the same colors on both maps. So in green on the map, you'll see a number of routes that are in green. Those are SMART's fast routes. So the existing fast routes are there, and then in this scenario, there is one additional fast route proposed, which is the 162. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. The routes that are in blue on the map, those are routes that we modify. And when we talk about modifying routes, it typically were minor modifications. Either we straighten the route out slightly, where we extended it slightly. Typically, if we made an extension, it was because there was some key destination within a few blocks of it. For example, there might be a Walmart that was a few blocks from an existing route. We wanted to make sure that we made a connection to that. And then there's orange lines on the map. Those orange lines are new routes that we propose. We'll walk through those. And then there are some colors, there are some routes in black. We wanted to make sure that you see those routes that are in black because those are existing smart routes that we didn't touch. Right? So just because they're not highlighted on the map, they are still there. They just weren't modified at all. All right, so in scenario 1, there's 5 fast routes, right, which includes that new 162. The 162 runs from downtown. It runs down to Beaumont Trenton Hospital. And in scenario 1, the fast routes would run every 20 minutes. There's 11 routes that would run every 30 minutes, and there's 25 routes that run every 60 minutes. Again, we determined those routes based on existing ridership. And if it had sufficient enough ridership, we increase the frequency. Under improving the customer experience, again, we modified about 12 routes. And again, those were ones where we tried to make them more efficient or effective. And then we also wanted to make sure we made connections to those things that were just off of the routes. One of the things that we're proposing in both scenarios is more predictable schedules. So we're proposing clock-in schedules. So for example, if the route comes at 1:05, then you would expect the route to come to that same stop at 2:05, 3:05, 4:05, etc. So it's more predictable, right? And while the routes right now are really close to that, imagine if a route comes every 51 minutes or every 49 minutes. It becomes hard over time to figure out exactly what time the next one comes. So again, moving the clock-in time should make it more predictable. And there's 36 routes where we increase or modify the hours of operation or extended the hours. In most cases, we extended hours significantly on weekends. So we added, in both scenarios, you'll see that there's additional hours on both Saturdays and Sundays. And if there was a route, for example, that had a key destination that had late hours, like the hospital, then we extended the hours to make sure that we could provide service to all 3 shifts. And then under improving connections, again, there's 5 new routes. In this one, there's 4 new flex zones, and we'll talk about flex in a little more detail. Makes connections to about 290,000 additional people. So those are people who live within a quarter mile of a route. 6 municipalities that aren't served today would have service within a quarter mile, and about 3,700 additional jobs. 3,700 additional employers, which provide about 26,000 additional jobs. Again, we want to know what you like about it. Well, and as we go on, we'll tell you how you can get into some more details, as well as answer any questions that you have. All right, so this is scenario 2. This one is very much focused on increasing coverage. So if you look at this map versus the last one, there's a lot more orange on this map than you saw, right? So instead of there just being a handful of new routes, there's 11 new routes in scenario 2. This was very much focused on trying to get to areas that weren't served today, but that match what the data told us before and what people told us on public engagement. In this case, there's still 5 fast routes, which again includes that E-route 162, but they would run every 30 minutes instead of every 20 minutes. There's 3 additional routes that run every 30 minutes and 37 routes that run hourly. And 13 routes that we modified, same as before. We still propose the same predictable clock-in scheduling, and then 37 routes where we increase the hours of operation. As I said, there's 11 new routes in this one, and you can see they're dispersed across the entire map, including new route here from West Bloomfield and Bloomfield. There are 5 new flex zones, which includes a new flex zone that covers parts of West Bloomfield Township and Bloomfield Township, and we'll talk about flex in a moment. This scenario covers 380,000 more people live within a quarter mile of that service. 10 municipalities that don't have service today would have service, about 7,000 additional employers, and about 64,000 additional jobs, all within a quarter mile of this service. We're going to take a few moments and talk about flex. Sorry. All right, flex. So hopefully everybody's familiar with Smart's Flex service, but just for level setting, in case you're not familiar, it is an on-demand service that's open to everybody. So about the closest thing we can compare it to is a service like Uber or Lyft. You can utilize an app, or you can call into a call center, you can request a ride, have a ride pick you up and take you to a destination within a fixed zone. So on the map here, you'll see that the zones are highlighted, and you can again request a trip within a zone and go to a destination within the same zone. As part of this, we propose, as many of you know, Smart has a number of community partners. There's over 70 community partners. And in this scenario, in both scenarios, we propose a pilot where 2 of the flex zones would be operated by Smart's community partners. So one in Rochester and one in Macomb Township. Well, Macomb actually covers parts of Shelby and Macomb Township. And then the other zones in purple are zones that would be operated directly by Smart. And you can see in some cases we did split the existing zones. And the reason behind splitting some of the existing zones is to promote efficiency. Having a very, very large zone sometimes could require a vehicle to drive from one end of the zone to another end of the zone to pick up a trip. So it reduces the efficiency and increases the wait time that people would have. So some of the zones are smaller than they were. However, they are contiguous. So you can get, for example, from Hall Road West to Hall Road East, there are slight overlap portions. The same for Pontiac North and Pontiac South. There are additional zones from what Smart operated before. And the new zones are in Warren and Wayne in scenario 1, and in scenario 2 in Bloomfield, Warren, and Wayne. So that's Flex. Again, we'll answer any questions that you have about it in a few moments. In order to get there, we did propose to remove some routes. Again, these are potential routes to be removed. No decision that we talked about here today is set in stone. And the primary decision maker for these routes is existing ridership, or that we made a modification to another route which made it redundant. Most of the routes, you can see several of these are parking ride routes, which were very much commuter focused, so which have lower ridership. But again, as part of the scenarios, we propose modifications to other routes to pick up what would have been eliminated by these routes. In scenario 2, there's less routes that are proposed for removal. You can see them here on the map as that applies. All right, so we did try to highlight the map a little more detail so that you can see it. This is the northeast portion of the map. So Macomb County, you can see that, again, the highlighted routes in orange are potential new routes. And this is between both scenarios, all highlighted on one map. If we talk here in the northwest portion, you can see, again, expanded service and the townships that are listed there. New routes include the 350, which would be a limited service on 8 Mile. That's in scenario 2. There's a 480 route from West Bloomfield to Bloomfield. There's a 750 in Wixom. There's a 795 in Oxford, which again potentially would be operated by community partner. And then the 799 Oakland University. Again, in the modified routes are listed there as well. And this is what it looks like in the southern portion of the region. Get an additional service to Hamtramck in both scenarios. A new service to Hamtramck in both scenarios. Additional routes in Romulus and additional services to try to reach areas in downriver. You can see the new routes that are listed there, as well as the modified routes. Again, the biggest change there are modifications to the flex zones around Dearborn. All in all, both scenarios have more flex service than what was provided, what's provided today. So a significant increase in the amount of territory covered by flex. All right, so last is how to provide additional input. First, you can provide input to us today. So we're really happy that all of you are here. thank you for taking your time and being engaged in this process. And we're going to take time to answer any questions that you have and collecting the feedback that you have from us. But you can also take part in some online surveys. On the project website, you can actually look at each and every route. So not only can you see the scenarios and as they are combined, but you can see each route and you can provide feedback on each route. And you can do a comparison between the route in scenario 1 and the route in scenario 2 if there's a difference between the two. And again, you can provide feedback directly there. You can also send us an email, and it's smartermobility@smartbus.org. And there's more meetings that are upcoming. So in addition to some in-person public meetings like this one today, there are also 2 virtual public meetings. So lots of ways to provide input. We also have some fact sheets and some comment cards over here on the table. So while you stop and by to get refreshments, you can take a moment and fill out a card if you don't want to ask the question directly here today. But most importantly, we still need to hear everybody's voice. We were really encouraged by SMART when this project started, to really take a comprehensive approach and to get out and to talk to the public and to gather as much input. And we put a lot of resources into talking to over 2,000 people. And we use that to develop the scenarios. And now that it's time to make a formal recommendation to SMART, we want to have that same level of engagement again. We really want to hear from as many people as we can and let us know what did we get right, which one of the options, if there's options, work best for you. And if there's tweaks that need to be made, let us know that too. Maybe we missed on an hour of service, or maybe we missed on a key destination that's off of a route by a block or 2. Like, we would love to hear that feedback. And with that, we'll take any questions that you have.
Well, I'm from Farmington Hills. They were talking about cutting Fex and Farmington Hills in 12 Mile and 405. I got that one from another meeting last night on TV. I'm in Farmington Hills City Council, but I need Fex, I need 12 Mile, I need 405.
Got it. So first of all, we really thank you for providing feedback, and we heard the same thing at the meeting last night. So one thing I want to say is, again, the original zones are still part of
I know your Fex doesn't always work. A lot of time I came did a ride to Planet Fitness at 12 in Melville.
Understood.
Your dispatch is overseas.
Dispatch is not overseas.
The vehicle center is in South Africa.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
In terms of the service back to 12 Mile, that's a change that can be made, and we again really appreciate that feedback. If there's demand for the service, we don't want to take away. We don't want to take away service that's being utilized. The data that we originally looked at showed that shrinking the zone would increase efficiency, but we've heard loud and clear that there's
12 Mile been there for a long time, so that 405.
Understood.
Also,
So I think there needs to be a clarification because the 12-mile route is being split to improve efficiency. It's not being eliminated.
740.
Right.
Right. It's not being eliminated at all. We split the route in half at the Royal Transit Center, and the reason behind that is twofold. One, we want to be able to deliver on-time performance.
it goes through Southfield, Farmington Hills, and Berkeley.
So it will still do that. You can still go from one end to the other. There's still coverage across that entire route. The reason for the split is to try to maintain on-time performance. In the way that the route is right now, it's very, very long, right? So there's lots of opportunity for the bus to get behind schedule and not have an opportunity to catch up. So by splitting it, one, it gives a better likelihood to have on-time performance for both segments. The other thing that it does is from an operations standpoint, imagine if every trip you made was 2 hours long before you had an opportunity to just take a break for a second, right? So it makes the trip safer from an operations standpoint. It makes it more a more reasonable work environment for the operator that has to keep making trips back and forth across 2 hours without a break, right? So again, we're looking at it from a safety standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, and being able to deliver on-time performance to customers. And that's, again, one of our #1 priorities. So that's the reason for the modification.
I know you took away 400 in the 14 Orchard Lake area.
Right, so we did propose to eliminate some routes as we outlined on the slides. Again, from a pure data standpoint, we don't make decisions just based on data, right? But when we first look at it from a data standpoint, it looks like there's not a lot of ridership. We have heard from some of that ridership. So what we've done from a service standpoint is any place where we propose to eliminate a route, there is some alternative, right? So there is either a route modification, or there is flex that's been introduced in a different way than it was before. But what we've done is try to, in some cases, we eliminated a route and technically provided more service, right? So we eliminated a trip that may only go 2 or 4 times a day and replaced it with an hourly service, right? That might not go the exact same route, but within a quarter-mile walk, we've provided more frequent service than what was there before.
I mean, I have 5 bus passes at home. I mean, for 405, 12 mile, 50 mile.
Understood. We really appreciate your feedback, and would love for you to provide some really detailed comments on one of the comment cards if I haven't had a chance to answer it. I'm gonna check really quick and see if there's others that have comments. Are there any other questions or comments?
You mean in general?
Yes.
I have a number, but just to stick on the same topic as that gentleman, is I can understand splitting the 740 route in half. My question has to do with, I live at Woodward and 11, and I often make trips across Royal Oak. And if those 2 routes get out of sync, first I want to know how long the layover would be if I needed to transfer from one 740 on the west to 740 on the east. And what measures will be in place to make sure those buses are in sync? Like if one bus is late by a half hour, then just to go a mile on the bus could take a long time.
Yep. Great question. So first of all, from a synchronization standpoint, we propose a 10-minute layover, right? So that the 2 buses would arrive, and they would, again, they mesh perfectly. There's a 10-minute overlap between the 2, right? So that does give a little bit of flexibility on both buses to be a few minutes late either way, and still be able to make the transfer without it. It is the real world, and we know that things happen along the roadways, right? There's accidents, there's construction. So I would not be completely honest about that. It's impossible for them to get out of sync, right? So it could happen, but ideally, shortening the routes reduces that likelihood that we get that far out of sync, right? We're no longer talking about a 2-hour run and having to deal with the synchronization issues. We're now talking 2 much shorter runs. And which also we also propose to increase the frequency there. So again, less likelihood that there is a less frequent opportunities for their delays along the route, because again, 2 shorter routes could be mitigated. Sean has something.
Yeah, when it comes to really vital time transfers like that, we do have the ability and authority to place instructions for the driver on their assignments if there's a time transfer hold for the other bus. So we have the ability to let them know unless there's some catastrophic delay, like a really nasty road accident or road closure, where we can make sure that there's a safeguard for that.
I say a thank you, because as somebody who's watched this kind of evolve from the beginning, I will say that they'll probably treat your comments the same way I've seen you treat others, and it does seem to evolve and change. So I would say thank you all for coming here, because this gives us a chance, but for sure the more you can get others to give feedback, they can't make decisions on anything but data if we don't give information. So I just encourage everybody to do this and to say thank you as a representative from Bloomfield for, I mean, you did. You are the reason, all of you, why we're now on an option. So it was from very loud pleading, I know. But one voice can make a difference.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
And
you
for
guys are
really,
amazing.
and for spreading the word about it. And as she said,
It's
we
constantly
listen,
evolving.
right?
Yeah.
We've been trying to make
It
it.
We're not just
Yeah.
stamping a thing that we did public engagement. We take all these suggestions and
Right.
incorporate them where we can. We can't do everything we wish we could, but we try to make it work.
Even last night at the Farmington City Council meeting, they made recommendations and we've already passed back. So,
Yeah, this looks
you know,
different. from the
it's an
last one.
ongoing process, and the more feedback,
Yeah.
it's easy to explore all those options.
I personally appreciate it, and I know we're excited to,
Well, from
to
your
spread
neighbor
this.
Farmington Hills?
Hmm?
Your neighbor Farmington Hills?
No, from the city council meeting last night, they had recommendations that we passed on to the consultants to explore that feedback, even from last night.
I have a lot of thoughts about the 740 split because I ride it every day. I often take it past Livernois, and I think you really should look at what happened to Telegraph as a cautionary tale, because that was a long route, but it was also unique as it basically provided a one-seat ride from nearly the south edge to nearly the north edge of the system. It was the ultimate crosstown before the 740s times, the ultimate crosstown. And nowadays, with it being split and the times not lining up and the 275 dealing with a lot of delays, it is nearly impossible to make that run unless you have an obscene amount of luck. I have a friend who stays off the 275 at the south end and says his life is ruined if he has to go north on Telegraph. So I think there are some other options that can be considered instead of just splitting the route as you proposed, perhaps an interline or extending the existing layover, which I understand the current schedule is 5 to 7 minutes for a short break at Royal Oak Transit Center as it stands. But getting past Livernois in either direction, no matter how short the trip, should not come with the potential for a whole slew of problems as this could potentially lead to.
Interlining is not out of the question, right? So I think just from a process standpoint, so we're all on the same page, and then I'll explain interlining really quickly. So from a process standpoint, our number one objective at this point was to get lines on the map, right? And to make sure that the lines are going to the destinations and get some buy-in, right? The next thing we have to go through after we can get agreements on the lines is to really kind of talk about the operation side of it, right? So there's what we have said timetable should look like, there's where we think stop spacing should be, there's the whole operational point of it. Interlining, for those who aren't familiar with it, is where a bus may change its route to create a one-seat ride, for example. So imagine in this case where we show the 740 and the 741, imagine it started in the east and traveled to Royal Oak as the 740, and then when it got to the 740 and took its break, it leaves as the 741, right? And then would repeat that process going back. That's what interlining is. It's often used in exactly this type of case where we want to create a one-seat ride, right? But we still need the operations of two separate routes. You could do it in other places where there's a hub, that a bus could come into a hub as one thing, and if the primary movement is to go someplace else, then the bus could leave that hub as a different thing. It's complicated, right? But it can be done, and it's not off the table. So it's a very valid suggestion. We've had some of these same conversations, and SMART's been very open with us on the front end to say interlining is, in play, right? Like they've given us a really, really blank canvas to do work, and we've had conversations about can we do things like interlining, and they've said yes. So not off the table. We just aren't there yet. So very valuable suggestion.
I didn't have one comment. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just a clarification, also just for the benefit of the public. Knowing this is going to be a multi-year implementation plan, is this based on the current resources SMART has now, or is there a certain assumption of expansion baked into these proposals?
So great question. So a little of both. I'll start with there. We have assumed that SMART's budget today to develop these scenarios there are some simple things baked in, for example, that property values have escalated and that there's, there is some small assumptions in there, but there is not, oh, Smart needs a 10% raise, in revenue to be able to do this, right? It's just things that are pretty much baked in. So we included in all of things like recent changes to labor and all of that. So that's all baked in. The implementation is more operationally focused than anything, right? It's not like you don't have dollars to do it today. This is an ambitious design, either scenario, plus imagine all of the conversations that we're having now. It takes additional staff, it takes additional capital, infrastructure. It takes major adjustments on the scheduling and planning side to put all of those things into place. So when we talk about it being a multi-year implementation, it's not because it's not because the dollars aren't there today. It's about making sure that all the resources are there. And then my last note on that is that we know we have to try to get it right the first time. People don't like when their bus stops move, right? So we don't want to put, I always talk about Miss Mary who likes to ride the bus. Miss Mary doesn't want her stop here today and then it be a block down the street tomorrow. So we can get it right today. Let's focus on trying to get the stop location right today, and then make less impacts to our riders who depend on it every day. Right? So that's the reason why our rollout takes a little more time than me. If we'd like to just wave a magic wand and go, January, all of this is going to happen. And that's not the case, right? But there's going to be a rollout.
The other thing that sticks out about that phased implementation is it's difficult to predict what the economy is going to do, and I understand that there's a certain amount of that you have to figure out what's going to be feasible. But I would just think if this plan were made in 2007 on the heels of the housing market crash, that would really dampen the practical effects on that you'd have to work with.
So I love these conversations, right? Because it's the same thing with like the pandemic that happened, right? There are people who did a whole new system design in 2019 and then everything happened, right? Well, it's the same thing, when I'll use, for example, some of the routes that we identified as potential for being removed. And you go, this might have been a great route, but now like demand has changed. And it doesn't mean it's still not a great route. It just means we might need to treat it differently. Maybe we have to market it more, or maybe we have to make it connect in ways that it didn't connect before. But you're right, the economy changes, housing patterns changes, employers relocate themselves throughout the region. There's a reverse commute pattern between Detroit and Oakland, right? I'm sure if you went back 15 years ago, that didn't exist, right? I'm sure as we looked at this project, we just made an assumption. Okay, people come from these counties into Detroit. It's not really the case, right? We have a reverse commute pattern, and that's something that has evolved over time. So even the things that we talk about here today, 10 years from now, somebody else will be standing here and having the same conversation about potential changes.
So I want to clarify that wasn't really meant to critique, more so just a comment for the good of the whole to understand.
It is. And I appreciate it because that is context that some people won't have in this discussion. Right?
Apparently my name is Miss Mary.
I'm Miss Mary too.
I'm pretty happy with the 460 route as it is now. And I like my stop. I don't like going across the street, across Woodward. I'd like to take a closer look at that route in particular. For me right now, I just take 11 miles straight across and it's a couple-minute ride to the Detroit Transit Center. And as I understand the proposed route, I'd be going down Woodward to 10 Mile and then back up. And it also decreases frequency into Ferndale, southbound, at least from 10 Mile to south. And I have a friend that lives in Ferndale near downtown, and he takes the bus, the 460 to the Y, and that's not going to be happening. Now he's gonna be going to Woodward and walking further. So I'd like to hear some of the rationale behind that. And most of the service seems to benefit 15 Mile.
So Royal Oak in general, and I'm the guy who drew lots of these lines on a map, right? So as we were trying to figure out how to optimize service through there, now I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, I promise to the rest of my team. I won't go too far down a rabbit hole. There were lots of routes that went similar places or that had overlap. So one of the things that we tried to do, it's a spread service, again, to be able to reach further in the service area, was to eliminate some of those redundancies. So you're right, it does go slightly out of the way that it did before. But I think if you look at some of the other routes, they go, all of the same destinations that were served from Royal Oak are still served. It's just not by the same vehicle, or the same route, if that makes sense. Right, so it may be that what was served by the 460 is now served with increased frequency on another route, or it was already served by another route. We just eliminated the duplicated service. So we can, if you want to take a look, we can pull out, maybe look at the route book and kind of look at all of the service in there. I think what you'll find is every destination is still served. It's just maybe not served the same way it was before. And then the reason behind that was we were looking at resources. Imagine if you got 3 buses serving the same stop that originate from the same transit. So that's a duplication that could provide service to somebody that doesn't have it today, right? So that's how we were able to go, oh, let's create the 750 or let's create the 480. It's a reallocation of resources in places where service was duplicated. So our apologies that modification has a negative impact on you. Again, in the larger picture, we were trying to create a system that eliminated some of the duplicate service.
To follow up, did you say something about frequency increasing on the 740?
So that's the intent, is to increase the frequency on the 740.
Did you have some idea of to what frequency?
So in the
30 minutes? Okay.
And that would help address if
That
they
helps.
missed the transfer, because you're not waiting another full hour for the bus to come. It's only that 30 minutes. So that makes that issue that was brought up easier too. If the buses are running every 30 minutes, it's not as catastrophic if one is running late, because there's another one coming in another 20 minutes or so. Does that make sense?
But it also helps on this 460 issue also.
So 30 minutes on both 740 and 741.
Yes.
All of them are those. We go for 30 minutes.
So 780 and 760 would all go to 30-minute frequency. Nice.
So let's make a note of how much people like that idea.
I love that.
That's one of my favorite ideas.
So Lucas, I guess the question that might to you is if it increases to 30 minutes, since you read that around a lot, does that change your opinion on splitting the 740 and 741?
I'd honestly have to think on that, because like you said, Harmony, if it is more frequent, that sort of reduces the danger of misconnections and packing trips. I don't know. I guess I didn't look closely enough to realize that it was happening, so I'll have to go back and look at it more closely to formulate a new opinion on it. But on the subject of the cross towns, I really do like the idea of extending 9 miles to Middle Belt there, because for one, that would make the Grand River a lot more useful connecting to a second cross town. But it would also provide the 9-mile corridor access to Target and some other shopping areas into Farmington, but that's an added bonus, really.
Yep, that's the example of one of those routes where we're looking like, wait, if we just go a little bit further, we can hit this key destination.
My thought with that before was to extend it all the way to downtown Farmington, but I bet that'd probably be difficult to find a good layover point in a crowded downtown.
Not only that, this is as we talk about being fiscally constrained, you'd be surprised, little change in how many hundreds of thousands of dollars a block costs, right? We're serving it at the frequency that we propose to serve it at with the extension and the amount of hours that, a couple blocks can easily translate into a couple $100,000 a year.
I should probably stop for time to understand.
I don't have any hookup in my area to downtown fire. No hookup.
From, you're saying there,
I'm from 14 and Orchard.
right, so we did hear about the flex in particular not continuing to go up to 14, so that's something that we're definitely gonna take a look at.
Yeah, I mean, it has picked me up before at my Rusty, at Running Stream, 14 and Orchard.
I think I'd similarly caution against removing that part of the farm bid flex, not only because it basically eliminates all-day service on that sort of stretch of Orchard Lake that used to be served by the 400. It also removes my home from the zone. So it is something handy sometimes.
And that's feedback we've heard time and time again, that 2 mile removal is gonna be more impactful than we realize, so. We've already talked to them about looking at those optics, so.
I'm glad that's still being discussed.
It was the first conversation.
So that means they couldn't get to 12 and Millbelt any time of the day to the club or to home from 12 and Millbelt.
You're saying you want to be able to do that? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, then you wouldn't be able to get to 12 and Millbelt Plant Fitness.
Got it. Any other questions?
I mean, I don't want to dominate, but I got a bunch of questions, but other people first.
Take these questions offline.
Yeah, and we can stay behind and answer any questions, additional questions that you have. Any more questions for the group at large? Well, I personally appreciate all of your time and your contributions. Hermione or Danny, you guys want to have any comments before we go?
Just thank you to Arian and Janae and the whole team at Baker. You've been amazing, and it's great to, as much as we've enjoyed this summer of public engagement, it's exciting to see that we're coming to the end of this phase and then are going to move into this next phase where they develop the final recommendations, take all this information, and the next time we come see you, we will have one map with all of these things that are important to all of us incorporated in it, hopefully. And then we will see what you think of that, and that will get us closer to the stage where we can begin implementation. So it's an exciting journey. We appreciate you being on it with us, and please go to the website and play around with the routes and leave notes and take full advantage of that. Okay, thanks. Have a good night. Drive or bus safely.